Corner with Dan Decker. I am Nicole Hickman, the engineering manager at Midwest Alarm Services, and I'm here with our industry affairs manager, Dan.
Hey, Nicole.
Dan, we've spent several episodes working through earlier parts of the International Building Code. Today, we're finally getting to Chapter 9, which is where fire protection requirements live. Before we get to the specific fire alarm sections, I understand there's some important groundwork to lay out. Let's start there.
Sure. Chapter 9 is titled Fire Protection and Life Safety Systems, and it deals with a wide range of fire protection, not just fire alarm systems. It deals with automatic sprinkler systems, alternative systems such as clean agent systems or kitchen hood suppression systems, fire alarm systems, and basically establishes the requirements for those. And then it goes on and ends up with carbon monoxide systems, which is kind of a new kicker. A lot of changes in that in the 2024 code.
Good. So chapter 9 is really like the hub for it all. Let's get into some specific sections. So section 901 applies to all fire protection systems. What should contractors and building owners know about it?
Chapter 901, since it's at the beginning, a lot of people think there's nothing specific here, so I don't need to look at it. And it's got some real fundamental stuff in there. The first thing it addresses is non-required systems. And that's kind of an interesting thing, because why would you look up the code requirements if the system wasn't required? Uh, but there is a section, an exception actually, in section 901 that specifically permits non-required systems, with the caveat that it be installed as if it were a required system. Now, if it wasn't required, there's no requirements for it. So that gets a little confusing. But essentially what they mean is if you put in a pull station, you have to comply with the requirements in the code for pull station, meaning the height and the distance from the exit. If you put in a notification appliance, same thing. You follow the coverage requirements of the code, you follow the mounting requirements of the code. So that's really what they're trying to say. But the code doesn't say, it doesn't prohibit you from putting in a non-required system.
So it's basically just saying if we're putting it in, we need to put it in per 72 in fire alarm case, right?
Exactly. Exactly. It get rid of the notion that, hey, if it's not required, you can't put it in. You can put it in, and the requirements are you just have to do everything like you normally would, as if it were a required system. It also addresses the issue of partial protection. If you've got, say, a conference room that has a coffee maker in it, and you're concerned about that coffee maker catching on fire if somebody accidentally leaves it on, you can put a smoke detector in the conference room and put it over the coffee maker and call it good. Just because you put in a device doesn't mean you have to fully protect your entire building with smoke detection. And so that specifically permits partial protection, that essentially voluntary partial protection. It also deals with monitoring requirements. Both fire alarm systems and sprinkler systems are required to be monitored in Section 901, which is the general section. There's some exceptions for residential sprinkler systems and limited area sprinkler systems, which are typically 6 sprinkler heads or less. And for fire alarm systems, if it's a required fire alarm system, this is where you find the requirement that it has to be monitored. It also addresses something that's kind of cropped up with the new technology, and that's called monitor yourself. And where somebody is getting status of their system on a phone, for example, it doesn't permit that information to be transmitted to the dispatch center. That's called monitor it yourself. And basically, the code wants no part of having a stream of data coming in that's not a professional monitoring center. So if the code official approves you to send your information into the monitoring center, the dispatch center, you can do that. But otherwise, the code prohibits monitor it yourself systems.
So 901 is establishing the rules that apply across the fire protection systems, including the monitoring requirements, which we just talked about. But Section 903 shifts to the automatic sprinkler systems. Most people think that sprinkler systems are a separate trade, but I understand that there's requirements in this section that directly affect our fire alarm contractors. So what do we need to know?
There's requirements that the system be supervised so that any valves that control the supply of water to the sprinkler system are electronically supervised. This goes way back into the BOCA codes. You could either have it monitored or you could put a padlock on it. And the padlock exception is pretty much gone away. And so the flow switches and the tamper switches need to be monitored on a sprinkler system, and they need to have tamper switches essentially on all of the valves that could shut off the supply of water to the sprinkler system. For quite a few years, up until the 2024 code cycle, there was a requirement in there that they had to provide an audible, and this was in the sprinkler system, there had to be an audible device outside the fire department connection or above the fire department connection. So that would ring when the sprinkler system was active. In the 2024 edition of the IBC, they have changed that requirement, and now it has to be what we've been doing for quite a few years, which is basically a horn strobe that's above the fire department connection. And so that's a new requirement, and it basically lands it squarely in the lap of the fire alarm contractor. It's actually required to be tied into the fire alarm system, powered by the fire alarm system. So previously, prior to 2024, or the 2024 code edition, a lot of times the sprinkler contractor just handed us a bell and said, here, make this work. And we did that. But nowadays, it's got to be off from the fire alarm system. And a lot of ASJs are requiring that that device only be active when the flow is active on the system, when we've got water flow. So it's not just as simple as taking your NAC circuit and sticking one of the devices outside above the fire department connection. Generally, it has to be a programmable NAC that we can program so it only activates on water flow and doesn't activate if we've got a pull station pulled or something like that, for example.
So we're going to see a move away from the 120 volt devices and moving more towards the 24 volt directly on the fire alarm system.
Yes, yep, that's the essence. A lot of ASJs have been asking for that for years, but the code never really supported that. It wasn't in the building code that said you had to comply with NFPA 13. NFPA 13 just said you've got to have a bell, and so there wasn't really a path other than this is what we want, please provide it. So now it's official. It's in section 903, and kind of following 903 is section 904, which is the alternative suppression systems, and essentially they're treated a lot like a sprinkler system. If the system goes into alarm, it's got to activate the building fire alarm. If the system goes into trouble, the system has to be interfaced to the building fire alarm system so that we know about it. However, if there isn't a fire alarm system in the building, there's no requirement to provide monitoring for the alternative systems or any type of supervision. So a lot of times a small restaurant doesn't have an occupancy that requires a fire alarm system, but they got a hood system in there, and that's fine. It's standalone, it works, and there's no requirement at that point to interface it. But where it's going into, say you've got a business facility that's got a building fire alarm system in it, and they put in a clean agent system in their server room, yeah, that needs to be tied in because there's already a fire alarm there. And if there is one, then that's what we have to do under 904 is to tie that together.
So 901 sets the ground rules. 903 tells us what to do with the sprinkler systems. 904 talks about the other suppression systems. So that brings us to 907, which is really the heart of the fire alarm requirements for the building code. So before we wrap up today, can you give us a preview of what 907 covers and why it matters?
Yeah, 907 basically takes the various occupancies that we covered when we went over chapter 3, and it picks out the occupancies that require a fire alarm system, and it tells you how much fire alarm system is required based on either the occupancy or in some cases the number of occupants within the occupancy. For example, an assembly occupancy, which could be a restaurant, has an occupant load requirement of 300 or more people. So if you've got seating for 300 people, or you get 300 people into your building, then you require a fire alarm system. But if you have a larger facility and you're over 1,000, then that changes the requirement from a simple fire alarm system to a emergency voice evacuation system. So essentially, instead of horn strobes, we've got to go with speaker strobes and give the ability for a responding fire department official to issue directions, because we've got, when you've got 1,000 people, there's some crowd management issues, so that's why they require the voice evacuation.
Well, that's a wrap on today's session of Code Corner with Dan Decker. Dan, as always, thank you.
Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
All right, next time we're getting into section 907.2, which answers the question every contractor and building owner wants answered. When is a fire alarm actually required? We'll go through occupancy by occupancy. So we'll see you then.